Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kimberly Beer. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. We're going to give everyone a chance to sign on and we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll give everybody one more minute. We'll get started. Okay, I think we can start. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Good afternoon, wherever you find yourself. Hopefully we have many people joining us from California. As I mentioned, I'm Kim Beer, the Director of Public Policy, and I would like to welcome everyone to this very special educational webinar about a very important ballot initiative, Proposition 14 in California, which would continue extremely important support for the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, otherwise known as CIRM. The Reeve Foundation is privileged to host this webinar with Dr. Mitra Hushmand and Jacqueline Henkin of Californians for Cures, the Californians for Stem Cell Research, Treatments and Cures Initiative. Before we get started, and feel free to advance the slide, I would like to remind everyone this will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. It is also closed captioned. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end, and you can ask your questions by submitting your question in the Q&A box. I'll be doing my best to monitor all the questions, and we're thrilled that there's so much interest in this really important topic. As the host and as a patient advocacy organization that supports Proposition 14, I would like to note that part of Christopher Reeve's legacy and advocacy was really focused on how investments in scientific research and pursuing avenues like stem cells was the way we would collectively move forward. He was so passionate about increasing federal funding, and in this instance, state funding that would advance the science for everybody, and of course for anyone impacted by spinal cord injury or paralysis. Today, we will learn about CIRM's history and how some of the funding supports SCI researchers and how we hope it is the promise for eventual treatments for our spinal cord injury. As way of context and some background, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation supports a wide range of innovative research programs to speed the development of treatments that restore function and improve the health and quality of life for those living with spinal cord injury. We also advocate for increased research funding and resources at the National Institutes of Health and the Department of Defense, which invest a lot in spinal cord injury research. And we hope that that number can continue and go up. Since 1982, the Reeve Foundation has invested over $136 million in research labs around the world to unite the brightest minds in the field under the Reeve Foundation banner. And we work together to achieve our ultimate pursuit, which is cures for spinal cord injury. We have seeded proudly some of the earliest discoveries in the field and created a comprehensive framework to accelerate progress across a full spectrum of spinal cord research from basic science to clinical trials. My colleagues, many researchers, have dedicated the better part of their careers to helping advance this basic science and translational discoveries. So I'd like to introduce a very special speaker, Mr. Bob Klein, who we're so thrilled can join us. He's the chairman and author of Prop 14, and he is himself a patient advocate. He had a relationship with Christopher Reeve, and he's the chairman of the California Stem Cell Initiative in 2004. He's the author of Proposition 71, which gave rise to CIRM, and he's the chairman emeritus of CIRM, and he's the chairman and president of Klein Financial Corporation, and he has, of course, received many numerous awards for his public service. Mr. Klein, we're so grateful to have you, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's a privilege to address the Christopher Reeve Foundation. As I had told you a little earlier, Christopher was one of my real heroes. As a patient advocate, when I met Christopher in New York, um, as a quadriplegic, he was inspiring, robust, full of life, determined, and with every breath, he would make a huge effort to take that breath in and then articulate his position in advancing stem cell research. It is extraordinary the progress that has been made, and that progress that we're aware of here in California with the support of the Christopher Reeve Foundation was centered around Proposition 71, which I wrote in 2004. It passed the California voters as an initiative, which funded $3 billion that has been distributed as grants based upon independent peer review recommendations to the board through the period really from 2007 through 2020. All of those funds have now been committed. And this new proposition, Proposition 14, which is on the November ballot, would put $5.5 billion behind the phenomenal work that's already occurred to drive these therapies forward. One of the great advances has been in the area of paralysis, and specifically the Asterius trials, a startup company that got funding from the state based on the merits of the science. They followed on after Geron, who had started the work with embryonic stem cells to create purified oligodendrocytes, a type of nerve cell that they felt could, in fact, generate regenerate activity in specifically in the upper torso where they focused thus far. There's a wonderful video that USC has done on Chris Boysen, their first patient, where they did 10 million stem cells that they injected in the spine at the site of the acute injury. And that video, it shows him lifting weights. Not every patient has had that level of restoration, but it's a very moving video that I suggest that you look at. Change your whole day, give you an inspiration. At California for Cures, that's CA for Cures, FOR, Cures, CURES.com, California for Cures. You'll be able to see that and other patient videos. It is amazing that this embryonically derived type of neural cell that's used in this therapy is now under a threat from the federal government, where a group of US senators has proposed to President Trump to ban embryonic stem cell research going forward, at the very time that the proof of concept is being proven, as the success in California with the clinical trials has rolled out across the country with many sites where quadriplegics are being successfully treated to varying degrees as they refine this therapy through the preliminary results. So it's a time of great hope, but a time of great challenge. And please, if you go to caforcures.com, look at Proposition 14 and the $5.5 billion it would provide to continue the research, and realize that it spans a whole spectrum of diseases and conditions, from paralysis to diabetes to cancer to epilepsy, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. We have 90 patient advocacy groups that have joined with us, led very early on by the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, in recognize the importance of funding stem cell research, going from adult cells to embryonic, through the entire spectrum of cell types, so that patients and their families and their scientists can choose what therapy type is going to aid them the best. But at this time of so great hope, where we see this progress, this potential ban is very troubling, because even if the President Trump doesn't respond to these senators and ban embryonic stem cell research that this progress is based on, we have the situation where 22 highly conservative senators can put a rider on an appropriation bill like they did with the Dickey-Wicker amendment previously, and prohibit the research from going forward, because appropriation bills need 60% of the Senate vote if they're in reconciliation. So while we're threatened on the federal level, the passage of Prop 14 will allow us to continue in California. So each of you needs to do your own research and make your own determinations, but this is a potential to continue this phenomenal research, and it will continue to support 12 institutes, stem cell institutes, centers of excellence and specialty research centers, and 7 alpha clinics that are leading the way in clinical trials. It is a phenomenal amount of research and infrastructure that has been built up with tremendous momentum to move us forward. In UC San Diego, they are now doing research to go from acutely treating paralysis to treating chronic or long-term paralysis on grants from the California initiative. That's going to be a tough lift, but it was a very tough lift to get through and show real strong proofs of efficacy with this first challenge with acute injury. What I'd like to say here is that patient advocates are vital to moving medical research forward in this country, and the funding at the federal level with the NIH, which makes a tremendous contribution. But in California, we have this initiative power where the public can put an initiative on the ballot. This is a patient advocate-led initiative. 925,000 California voters signed a petition to put this on the ballot on November 3rd. And patient advocates are going to have a vital role in messaging because they have a privileged message and they're privileged messengers. When they send a message out about a healthcare issue to their friends and families, those people read that message because it comes from someone they know, and it comes from a critical issue, the health of the person they love or for which they are good friends. So it has a tremendous penetration and effectiveness that other messages do not have. So you, patient advocates and individual patients and families, have a tremendous power that is critical. In the next 13 days, voting starts in California. We expect about half of the voters are going to try and vote very early in the first week. So whatever you can do in the next 13 days to message about how important it is for people to look at Prop 14. They have to make up their own decision on how to vote, but the history of progress that has occurred already has been remarkable, and specifically in the area of paralysis with the leadership of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. I'd like to say that because it's been so successful in moving therapies forward in cancer and diabetes and other areas, it has attracted $4 billion of matching funds just through 2018, and through 2020, it's about $9 billion of matching funds. Conservative, let's say it's 7. So because of the continuity, because it gets outside of what the political repression of science in Washington, D.C., donors and others have supported this effort in moving stem cell therapies forward for everyone. With that, Kim, I'd like to say thank you to everyone, and it's been a great privilege being able to address the people that are patient advocates for paralysis today.
Thank you so much for joining us and for your passionate words. And we really look forward to our next speaker, Dr. Mitra Hushmand. She's the Director of Scientific Programs at Yes on 14. And feel free to, yes, wonderful. So it's so wonderful to welcome her today. She's also a patient advocate. She received her PhD at UC Irvine in a spinal cord injury lab. So we really look forward to hearing not only her educational pursuits, but her passion around improving the lives of people with spinal cord injury. She completed 2 years of postdoctoral fellowship in SCI, and she's currently the Director of Scientific Programs at American for Cures, as well as the Director of Scientific Programs at the Campaign Organization for Prop 14. And finally, as if she doesn't have enough to do, she's also a lecturer at UCLA. Dr. Hushmand, we welcome you. And before we get started, I'm sure you're going to address this. I just wanted to highlight, we had one question already, and I'm pretty sure you're going to talk about how this proposition will be funded.
Excellent. Yes, thank you, Kim, and we will
Thank
address
you.
that too. I wanted to start by thanking all of you for being here and for giving us your time to learn more about Proposition 14. It's a pleasure to not only have your attention, but also to be working so closely with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, which I have personally gotten to know for many, many years since the start of my graduate career, as Kim alluded to. So I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my personal journey because I think it paints a little bit of context into where I come from and how much of a deeply rooted connection I have to the spinal cord injury community. I started my graduate school at UC Irvine just 5 years after the discovery of human embryonic stem cells, and when I first learned about these cell types, I thought this must be the future of research, medicine, science, and I wanted to be a part of it. And I wanted to find a lab that is working on stem cells in particular, but also working on some kind of a translational research, a research that would then apply to patient populations, and it wouldn't just stay at the level of basic science. I wanted to help change people's lives in some ways. That may sound like a really grand and cliche mission to me right now or to many of you, but that truly was my intent from the very beginning of this journey. And from there, I met this wonderful woman and mentor that some of you may actually know. I know that she has worked very closely with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation for over 20 years now, Eileen Anderson. She was the principal investigator of a lab at UC Irvine who was working at the time on using neural stem cell populations to look at the potential application of these cell types in treating spinal cord injury, specifically in animal models. But in just having a very brief conversation with her, I realized her goal synergized and aligned perfectly with mine, because all she was thinking about is translation and how to get these cells and therapies out to the patients. And so I remember when I first started my work, I specifically remember this thought in my head. I remember saying to myself that I'm gonna help people injured, those who are paralyzed, sitting in wheelchairs, walk again. And I precisely remember saying this to myself. And then I ended up going through a training program as a result of my graduate work. And I had the opportunity to meet another wonderful woman, scientist, who is herself injured, Dr. Kim Anderson. And in 2004, I learned that she had done a survey that she then published, looking at the priorities of spinal cord injured individuals and trying to understand what is it exactly that they want scientists, the spinal cord injured population wants scientists to focus on as their area of research. And I was somewhat shocked, to be honest, with the findings. And I think this just goes to show you how disconnected perhaps the scientists or the physicians may be with the actual patients. Because what I learned is that, in fact, data suggests that the quadriplegic population cares the most about arm and hand function. That's their #1 priority. And walking was actually pretty low on their list of priorities. I also learned that sexual function is much more important to the paraplegic population than is walking abilities. And this really opened my eyes. It changed the way that I think about research. It changed the way that I thought about the direction of my future work. It really was for me a moment of just pure transformation. And my goal really changed at that point. And what I started to think to myself is, moving forward, I'm going to listen, communicate, try to understand, and do everything that I can to help restore health to those who've sustained these types of injuries or who live with chronic conditions every day. And I felt that this was something that I can achieve one way or another, whether I'm a scientist or in any other aspect of science. I should be able to push forward the agenda of restoring health to the public. And from there, after doing my postdoc, I met Bob, who you just saw and met, and I was truly inspired by everything that he had done for Prop 71 in 2004, which partly supported my research, in fact. And I decided that I was going to shift gears from being at the lab to going into policy and trying to help make some really major changes to the extent that I could. In terms of the way that we fund research and continue to advance therapies. And that's how my connection to Americans for Cures initially started, which is the organization that educates people about stem cell research. And now, as of January, my work with the campaign specifically to make sure that the public, and especially the California public, is aware of Prop 14 and its potential impact. I'm going to run through these very briefly because you already heard Bob talk about them as well. What brought us to Prop 14? Why are we here? Really, the historical context starts from 2004 when Prop 71 passed. This was an initiative that proposed $3 billion of stem cell funding over the course of 10 years in the form of bonds, which is actually how this new initiative, Prop 14, is also going to be funded. So just to address the question that was asked earlier. And it passed with a 59% majority. And this initiative was supported and endorsed by over 80 advocacy organizations, including, obviously, as you heard earlier, the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation and Christopher Reeve himself. And this led to the inception of STERM. So the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine that Kim referred to at the very beginning of this talk came about as a state institution or a state agency, very similar to NIH, if that helps you to make a little bit of a comparison, but at the state level, and funding for only the state of California. So the $3 billion in the form of bond sales that came to STERM began to get disseminated to California scientists to continue to advance research and medical advancements forward in a variety of different areas, including, I mean, if we count the total number of disease areas, it's probably over 75 different areas. It's had a tremendous impact on the scientific community. There are 64 clinical trials that have been directly funded by STERM. 2 of those were in spinal cord injury, both phases of the Asterias trial that I'll talk about in a second. There were 30 additional trials that were funded by STERM early on in their basic discovery stage. And then the biotech industry or other institutions came in and helped to advance those studies to clinical trials. And again, one of those studies, the neural stem trial, is one that came from early funding of STERM. There are 4 active clinical trials right now that are in phase 3. 3 of them are in kidney failure and 1 is in ALS. close to 3,000 peer-reviewed publications, which are sure to change the entire field of science, landscape of science. I mean, publications are the way we learn from each other as scientists. In addition to all of that, SHRM has also trained a lot of students, the future workforce of not just California, but really anywhere, because these students could then graduate and go on to take jobs and anywhere really across the nation or the world. And 1,200 of those, or close to 1,300 of them, were undergraduate students and master's students, and the success rate of that program in particular has been amazing. 80% of those students who were trained through these programs have gone on to either take jobs in the biotech industry or at institutions, or they have gotten into grad school. And these are typically students who wouldn't have had access to a four-year university to do research. So it really has expanded the diversity of the workforce within the state of California. There have also been 2 FDA-approved drugs that have emerged as a result of early funding that SHRM provided to 2 fatal forms of blood cancer. So as you can see, the impact has been across the board in many different areas, ranging from clinical trials to basic discovery to training, and I didn't even talk about infrastructure and buildings that have gone up. But there are also some very broad application discoveries that SHRM has developed. One is the development of different approaches to increase immune tolerance, which, as you may have heard from the stem cell transplantation field, is always a challenge to make sure that the cells that you put in are not rejected by the patient. And there are ways now, there are approaches that have been developed to try and circumvent a lot of that cell rejection without necessarily using aggressive irradiation or chemotherapy or other immunosuppressants. There have also been imaging techniques that have been developed, and this is particularly important if we want to know what the cells are doing once we transplant them, and this is critical for our ability to advance clinical trials. So these imaging techniques are very useful. And SHRM has also given rise to the generation of the world's largest iPSC repository, which is basically a bank. You can think of it as a stem cell bank that holds induced pluripotent stem cells. And induced pluripotent stem cells are a new concept. Well, they're no longer new, but in 2006, they were discovered by a Nobel laureate, in fact, Shinya Yamanaka, where we learned that we can take cells from the skin of a patient or the blood of a patient, for instance, and turn the clock backwards on them, sort of erase their memory about the fact that they're skin or blood, and then tell them to become whatever we want them to become. And these cells can provide lots of avenues for innovative research. And like I said, there's a bank of them now that SHRM has generated, and it's accessible to scientists across the world. So we're not talking small scale California only. We're talking everyone who is interested in this type of work. It's also established centers of excellence, which are known as alpha clinics. And these alpha clinics are really important because they're centers that are placed across the state of California to make sure that the patients have access to evidence-based clinical trials. Some of you may have heard of some, what I call rogue clinics, rogue stem cell clinics that are making a lot of promises. They're telling you to come in and they'll just take fat cells, you know, from your abdomen and put them into your spinal cord, and they share a lot of anecdotal stories about how this particular therapy has helped 1 or 2 people. That's very different from evidence. Evidence-based studies are first done through clinical trials, and these alpha clinics are providing legitimate clinical trials to patients so that they can be sure that the treatment that they're receiving, A, doesn't cost them money, which it shouldn't, and B, that it has gone through rigorous scientific review and the FDA has authorized for that clinical trial to advance forward. So these are incredibly important for making sure that we continue to give access to patients to legitimate trials. I'm going to run through this very quickly because it's not my wheelhouse. I'm a scientist. I'm terrible at economy, but these numbers are pretty good looking to me. So the impact on the California economy, as you can see, has been tremendous in terms of job creation and tax revenues. But again, it doesn't end there. It's also had a tremendous impact on the US economy as a whole. So this has become an economic stimulus for the state, the establishment of SHRM, and it's expected that this portfolio will only expand as we move forward into Prop 14. But I want to get to the SCI research because that's, I'm sure, what you're most interested in. So let's talk about how much the spinal cord injury community has reaped from the existence of SHRM. So the total number of, the total amount of funding that's been given to SCI research is nearly $61 million. If I understand correctly, and Kim can correct me once we're back on with her, but if I understand correctly, in her introduction, she indicated that the Reeve Foundation has given over $136 million of support. You can see that SHRM has given out 50% of the same amount of money that the Reeve Foundation has been able to give as support, and that's tremendous. Because we're synergizing, we're all going in the same direction. We are trying to find treatments and cures for paralysis, and the more money we can funnel into this type of research, hopefully the quicker we will get to those results. So I think this is a tremendous amount of progress for SCI research. $22 million of that money have gone directly to clinical and translational grants. It's almost unheard of to have a federal or state agency. In fact, there are no state agencies that are doing what SHRM is doing. But even at the level of NIH, it's almost unheard of for them to put this much money into clinical trials because it's just not a part of their portfolio. They focus on basic science. So SHRM is really doing something that's exceptional in that sense. And another 28 million or so have gone to discovery grants. Some of the rest of that money has gone into infrastructure, building the alpha clinics, the repository, all of the other components that I indicated. And in terms of total number of awards, this is a little bit of a breakdown of the awards that have been granted to the SCI research community. So clearly there has been an impact made by SHRM on the SCI community. But I wanted to highlight one particular case in particular, which I think most of you may have even heard about, and that is the SciStar study or the Asterius trial, which has taken quite a number of turns in terms of its funding industry, because it started out, some of you may have heard of it when it was the Geron trial, then Geron got bought out by Asterius, Asterius got bought out by Biotime, and Biotime got bought out by what is now Lineage. So Lineage Therapeutics is currently holding the IP for this particular study, and they have advanced the study forward all the way to the end of its phase 1/2 clinical trial, which, as some of you may know, is basically a safety and dosing study. $14.3 million of SHRM funding was given to Asterius/Lineage to continue this study, and it has also received from the FDA what's called an RMAT designation, which basically means that this group, the Lineage group, and this particular trial is somewhat of a priority to the FDA. And RMAT designations are given the opportunity to meet with the FDA much more regularly to get much more directed information and guidance from the FDA about how to move forward. Their application is generally fast-tracked. So lots of advantages to getting this kind of a designation. And this particular trial is one of 7 from SHRM-funded trials that has received this kind of designation. So I think it's a great accomplishment. This project, as you may know, and Bob also alluded to it at the very beginning, takes human embryonic stem cell derived cells, pushes them into a very specific cell type called oligodendrocyte progenitor cells, or OPCs. OPCs are the types of cells that myelinate axons. I'm sure that all of you know exactly what that means. I've noticed that the patients within a particular community are sometimes more educated about these things than the scientists are. But just to simplify it for the sake of anyone who may be watching later, basically oligodendrocytes provide myelin sheaths, which are fat, essentially fat around axons. And this fat serves as insulation. Think, for instance, of the wire of a laptop computer, right? If that wire gets naked at any point, if it loses its insulation, it's not going to conduct electricity properly. Same exact concept in the brain and the spinal cord. You need the nerves, these axons, to all have insulation vis-a-vis myelin sheaths. Oligodendrocytes provide those myelin sheaths. And since one of the consequences of spinal cord injury is the loss of this myelin, oligodendrocyte progenitor cells are able to wrap that insulin. And the hypothesis was going into this clinical trial that those cells could then help to restore some function. Now, keep in mind, this was a phase 1/2 trial, which means that the primary endpoint was safety, making sure that everything would go well and there would be no adverse events. But in fact, the results showed, and let me tell you, actually 25 patients were transplanted in this study. These were quadriplegic, cervically injured patients, and these are subacute patients, so between 21 and 42 days after spinal cord injury. There were no unexpected adverse events. The cells engrafted in 96% of the patients, which basically is a fancy way of saying they were there. So in 96% of the patients, the cells did not die, which is important if they're gonna insulate the axons. And 96% of the patients demonstrated one level of motor recovery post-transplant, and 32% demonstrated 2 or more levels of motor recovery. So this is tremendous. And Chris Bozen, whose picture was also on my first slide that Bob also referred to as one of those patients who was in the second category, experiencing 2 or more levels of motor recovery. The results are, we can't wait for these studies to continue. The results are tremendous. What is important to highlight here is that this study has been completed. I do also want to emphasize again that this particular study was performed subacutely, right? So these are for patients who have been injured within a 21 to 42 day mark. But I also know that Lineage is continuing to work on advancing these trials to the next phase. And they are for sure working on ways to change the way that they're delivering the cells. They're working on scale up so that they can enroll more patients in future clinical trials. So all of this work is coming, and it will need money. It's gonna need help and support. And so this is where it actually becomes really critical to continue to advance this kind of work forward, because if we want this clinical trial to keep going and hopefully even advance it to other populations, the more chronic injured populations, then we've just got to keep going on these studies. We can't stop. And the other major challenge I want to raise here is the point that Bob alluded to earlier. This is a trial that uses human embryonic stem cells. And so if the executive order ban that the 2 congressmen have urged President Trump to put on human embryonic stem cell funding goes through, we could see some changes in terms of the direction of these kinds of therapies. This is why SERM is so important, because it can continue to advance those therapies forward, even if there is a federal ban, because at the state level, we can do that with this money. And hopefully, eventually, if that therapy becomes available, it becomes available to all. So keep in mind that there have up until now been 17 basic discovery grants given out to the field of spinal cord injury by SERM. Of these 17, one that we just talked about, the Asterios trial, has continued to advance to clinical trials and is being supported by SERM and hopefully will continue to be supported. That means there are 16 others who need to make it through these valleys of death. This is a common terminology that's used in drug discovery. They need to make it through these valleys of death as they go through clinical trials. And the reason there are these valleys is partly because some therapies just don't work once they're tested in clinical trials, but part of it is also money, lack of funding, the inability to get certain discoveries all the way from one particular trial into the next. So all of this is very important to keep in mind as we think about the next phases of drug discovery. One other therapy, this is Martin Marsala's early study that was funded, it's among the 17 discovery grants, has also gone on, in fact, to a clinical trial that's funded by Neuralstem, the company Neuralstem, and that one does focus on the chronic phase, 1 to 2 years after injury. Again, that clinical trial has been completed. It's completed its first phase. It transplanted 4 patients. It had positive safety profiles. If it wants to keep going, it's got to find a way to get more funding. So it's very important that these limitations are recognized. So that brings us to Prop 14. This is a bond initiative, again, to address the question that was asked earlier, and it authorizes $5.5 billion of state bonds for stem cell research in the state of California. I want to highlight that $1.5 billion of that money will immediately be earmarked for brain-related diseases. This includes spinal cord injuries. So 30% of that money, close to 30%, it's 27% of that money will right away be dedicated to brain-related diseases, which hopefully means more therapies, more progress and advancements in those areas. There's also other components to this bill that I'm not gonna bore you with. I mean, they're super interesting to us, obviously, but I just wanted to, you can always read further information about them, but it does increase access and expands affordability to the public if these therapies make it all the way out the other end and become FDA approved. So now we're in this phase of the proposition, we're thinking about how we can make all of this available to more and more people. If we want to enroll patients who don't necessarily live in California, but we want to enroll them in these clinical trials, how can we support their travel and make sure that they can get to these clinical trials? So all of this is being considered in the new language of Prop 14. And I'll just conclude by mentioning that the proposition, Prop 14, has tremendous support, mostly from disease and patient advocacy organizations. Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation were probably amongst the very first to endorse this initiative, and we're deeply grateful for their support as they've continued to do that. But as you can see, many others. Conquer Paralysis Now is also a spinal cord injury community or organization, and many, many other organizations in a variety of different diseases, all of whom recognize the importance of continuing to fund this kind of research so that we can advance these therapies forward. Lots of Nobel laureates, scientists, national and state community leaders, many, many patient advocates, and elected officials, including the California governor as of two weeks ago, and even religious organizations and many more. So really the support that has gone into this, which has all been grassroots level, by the way. We don't have a ton of money for this campaign, but as you can see, this is coming from passionate individuals. You'll hear from Jacqueline, my wonderful colleague, in a moment, who you will see also has a personal story. My personal story was my connection through the work that I did as a scientist, but Bob, for instance, also had his own personal story that I was surprised he didn't share with you, but he had a son with type 1 diabetes. I think he was being humble. He had a son with type 1 diabetes, and the reason why he even wrote Prop 71 to begin with was to save Jordan. He thought that if there was a way to fund stem cell research, type 1 diabetes may have a treatment or a cure. And that's why he wrote Proposition 71. Sadly, Jordan did not make it for other reasons. But Bob's passion, as you saw, which I'm so glad you did, has not subsided one bit. the man is just as driven to keep pushing this forward, to keep finding therapies. And it really is an honor and a privilege to work for someone who is truly thinking about the healthcare of those in need, patients, and their caretakers. And I can say that with confidence because not only have I worked very closely with him, but I also can see in terms of the way that he thinks about the ethics of this campaign, for instance, not taking a single penny from the biomedical industry for campaign purposes, because he doesn't want to make this a biased support. So I think that speaks volumes about the people behind this campaign, the organizations and the support that goes into it. And with that, I hope that I've been able to address any of your medical or scientific questions and others. And of course, at the very end, happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. That was really extraordinary. I learned a lot myself, so thank you very much. And now we're thrilled to welcome Jacqueline Henkin, who is a patient advocate and advocacy and outreach senior staff member for Californians for Cures. And I also have gotten to know Jacqueline, and she's also a passionate advocate for the Reeve Foundation. So we're really pleased and thrilled to have her present her personal story and the reason why she's involved in this proposition. Jacqueline?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kim. Thank you to the Reeve Foundation, of course, Dr. Mitra and Bob, our founder and author. It is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to speak to you today. You can hear me, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. And to be involved in the initiative, I did have the honor too of working on Prop 71. I lived in close proximity in Northern California when I got alerted to this initiative. And you saw the previous slide. There was me with my dad, who had an accident in 2001 and sustained a spinal cord injury in the upper C6-7 region. And it is he who drives me every day to do better and work hard towards mitigating suffering of disease and injury for all. And that is, I come to this as a patient advocate, as a daughter of somebody with an injury. So it is, it's an honor. It is a true honor. The thing we've heard so much today through Bob, from Kim, from Dr. Mitra, and I just want to kind of conclude before we get to the to some Q&A about the things that you could do to help drive this, not just for the remaining 40-something days into the election, which is critical and vital to everything that we've heard in terms of our call to action. So you should follow us on these various different social media channels, and I can talk with Kim afterwards about how we can disseminate that information. Please join our coalition today, CaliforniaForCures.com. You can find us, doesn't matter if you live in California or not, in terms of the outreach, the advocacy, and the education on the initiative, but for the long run, in terms of what is being done in this field and how you can stay on top of all of us on the research, the knowledge, and what is happening here, particularly in California. To please tell your friends and family about the initiative, about the research, about the science, and please join us, join our conversations, endorse us, again, whether you live in California or not. We are a powerful force, as you know, patient advocates, and we need to be heard. We need to share your stories with us, your stories of hope and promise and all that is of the potential. We are collectively stronger and better together, and I thank you for the opportunity, the Reeve Foundation particularly, for your ongoing support of the California Institutes, and we look forward to hearing from you and staying in touch. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacqueline. It looks like we have, just a clarification. I want to shout out to some of our participants who are asking really good questions, and it looks like we covered all of them. I don't think, unless there's any additional questions, I'll give everybody an opportunity to ask a question if they'd like, but I really want to thank all of you, especially Dr. Mitra. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's not every day that we are able to highlight the work in some states, so this really gives us a chance to highlight all your great work, especially for our community members in California. So it looks like we don't have any additional questions. Oh, maybe we have one additional. Somebody asked me a question. How much is the campaign going to? And I'm not sure that the whole question that was written here. So I'll give that person just a minute to see if they need to clarify that. But as I wait, as I mentioned, this is recorded. We'll post this on our YouTube channel. And as Jacqueline mentioned, there's plenty of information and ways to get connected through, and we can send that out as well to the participants, ways to stay connected to the proposition and tracking it. And we're going to hope for the best. So let me see if that person just clarified their question.
I'm just going to add one thing, Kim, when you have a chance. I just, as Kim had mentioned, it's been an honor to get to know Kim a bit and working along with us on our advisory committee. So thank you for your time and your commitments. Additionally, we are so lucky and grateful. And it was, of course, our disappointment because of this pandemic, but I am committed to running the New York City Marathon with Team Reeve when we're able to meet those streets again someday sooner than later. So follow me there too when that time is right.
Thank you for that, for your support and for that shout out. And in case anybody is interested, we're having our international virtual 5K on October 17th. You can find information. We're hoping to get participation from not only every state in the US, but around the world as well. And we're really thrilled to be able to do that despite these very difficult circumstances and the unfortunate nature of the fact that many of these marathons have had to be canceled. So thank you. Okay, it looks like maybe I have some additional questions.
Perfect.
How much is the campaign going to cost? I think, Dr. Mitra, you mentioned it's 5.5 billion. Is that correct?
So that's how much money would, that's the amount of money that would be provided to the scientists. That's not, I believe the question is asking how much the campaign itself will cost. And we're assuming, or not assuming, we believe it's going to be around $25 million to run this campaign. We have about 10 million of that already locked in, but the last 15 million we're working hard on. As you can imagine, with the pandemic, this has not been easy. A lot of people have lost money in the stock market, and it's just been challenging. So trying to close that gap. If you know of anyone who may be able to contribute, this is at the last moments of fundraising. So obviously would love to get any sort of a connection if that is the case, if anybody knows of anybody who may be able to help in any way.
Great. We did actually have a question about where one might be able to support the campaign and possibly so thank you very much.
Perfect.
For
Yeah.
that participant. Well, looks like I'm sorry.
That's great. And then all at CaliforniaForCures.com, you can find, a host and wealth of information there, and, connect with us also directly to advance any of the questions that someone might have in that way and support.
Great. Well, I think we've come to the end. Again, please send our thanks to Bob for joining, and thank you both so much. I think this was really great. Hopefully we can do it again after Election Day, so to get an update.
Victory. Yep. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Kim, if anybody has further questions later on, we can share our email addresses. They can contact us directly if they'd like to. We're here. And like I said, for me, this is very personal, and it is for Jacqueline as well. So we're happy to communicate on a one-on-one basis for this particular, with this particular community.
Thank you very, very much. That's very generous. Thank you. Well, stay well, everyone, and we'll be in contact soon. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You
Bye,
too.
everyone.
Stay safe and healthy. Thanks.
Thank you.